Hello, I am Allison Zmuda, and I am so excited to be joined by the fabulous Lauren, who is coming from World of Learning, a wonderful French teacher, and she's going to talk about curriculum storyboards. So just a quick heads up, in case you haven't gotten this in your mailbox yet, if you're an ASCB member, I just want to do a quick plug for streamlining the curriculum. This book actually came out last Tuesday, so it's very much hot off the presses. And one of the cool things is that our partnership with World of Learning, they had an opportunity to do a deep dive over the past year, including a 3-day workshop that Lauren was a part of. So again, as we're starting to talk about this, we're featuring the work that Lauren did, inspired by some of the core ideas in this book. Also want to give a shout out to Heidi Hayes Jacobs. I know she's not with us right now in terms of being on live tonight, but she is going shoulder to shoulder, and Lauren, she just continues to sing your praises as well. So I think it's okay, and we'll get started. But anybody, by the way, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and enter those into the comments section. So we'll continue to reflect on some of the insights and wonderings and questions you have, whether it's for myself or Lauren. But let's get started. So, Lauren, let's start talking about the idea of just starting to design a curriculum storyboard. Can you tell us a quick snapshot as to how this journey started for you and what the design process looked like?
Definitely. So I first heard about curriculum storyboards through Olivia Grugan, who, as the story goes, attended a keynote speech, I think it was, by Heidi at PASCD. And she started working on a Spanish 1 storyboard called Survival Spanish. And I just loved it so much. I thought it was so great. And it all just made so much sense to me, right? Stories. Who doesn't love a story, and how it can connect the curriculum all together in a cohesive way. I was immediately gripped by it, and I knew I wanted to do something with our French curriculum. I had started out at the World of Learning as a French teacher, and in my role at that time, I was a virtual learning specialist, and I was attending a lot of conferences, and I was getting all this great insights about, language learning and all this going on, what everybody's talking about in regards to language learning. And so I just was I feel like this French 1 course that I started to work on was like a big culmination of all these different sorts of inspiration that I had at the time. And so I made this storyboard. I came to Olivia several times, coming back and forth, I don't know, what about this story, what about that? And initially I thought, maybe I'll just try to do something really similar to what Olivia did. Maybe I'll do survival French. And then I realized you have to write your own story, kind of, And so I landed on identities. And so I can talk more about how I was kind of brought to that idea and why identities, but that's kind of what, word of mouth brought me to storyboarding. And
well, I'd love, if you're okay, to talk a little bit about identities, and we'll go ahead and put the visual image of that first page for French 1, just to support that thematic conversation. And again, anyone that has a question or an insight or a comment, go ahead and throw those in the chat as Lauren's starting to describe this.
Right, so French identities with the icon of a thumbprint there, or fingerprint. I landed on identities because I was at the National ACTFL Conference, or the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and I found myself, just sitting in on a lot of the social justice themed workshops, and I was really inspired, and I learned about the social justice standards from a Learning for Justice. And Learning for Justice social standards has 4 different domains, and the first one is identity. The second one is diversity. Then you have justice, and then you have action as the 4th. And I knew I wanted to kind of overhaul the French curriculum. We had a really solid French curriculum at that time, but I was recently really interested in anti-bias education and how we could make our French courses more reflective of the French-speaking world, and not just France and Paris and croissants and the Eiffel Tower, which are all wonderful things. But I also wanted to show more of the diversity of the French-speaking world. So I was also thinking about a 4-year sequence, more of a traditional 4-year sequence. And I started to think about at that high school level, the ages of students and how that was sort of like lining up for me. Like as a typical maybe ninth grader, you're maybe thinking like maybe a little more inward, like, you know, what's to do with me right now, my identity. And then maybe as you can go on, you can start to appreciate the diversity of others. And then a little bit farther along, more mature, you can start to think about justice and what's going on in the world. And then as you're ready to like head out into the world, maybe you're ready to take action. And so that's where I landed with this French one, identities. And I made it plural because I was led to this idea of the learner meeting different French speakers along the way. And then also realizing that like you can belong to many different groups in society, and that like, you know, you're not fixed and everybody is changing all the time. And so many things make up our identities. And so that's where I landed. And it's a little bit, go ahead, Allison.
No, I mean, it's so fascinating, especially because the age bracket that you're teaching. So they are very much adolescents, and they are growing and changing and shifting in real time. So the student that showed up on day one may or may not be sort of the same child, you know, 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years later. So if you can go, Chrissy, if you can go to that second page, the opportunity to begin to start to see the flow of the experience, because one of the things that I appreciated is that there's a little bit of a flavor of what a potential traditional or timeless French 1 curriculum looks like. But at the same time, very quickly, you can start to see that it's very much grounded in the notion of who am I? What do I like? Where am I from? Who are my people? But who are my people is bigger than your family. Who are my people is really an extension into not just your friends and your local community, but the networks that you associate or affiliate with. So can you talk a little bit about some of the highlights of identity, again, through that social justice lens, specifically in some of the modules?
Yeah, definitely. The way I wanted to do this is, you know, more of like a spiral out. So you're starting really centralized, like down to the, you know, even just in our little Zoom classroom, we're an online program. So we actually teach students online. And so we have all sorts of like norms that we need to establish in that first module. So we're starting really small and granular, as in, you know, let's get comfortable with each other and just the idea of learning a language, and then spiraling outward. You know, I was likening this sort of narrative to being almost like that Dr. Seuss book, Are You My Mother? And it's like every step along the way, each one of these artifacts, like an ID card, my address, like, are you my identity? Like my ID card? Do you show me everything there is to say about me? No, of course not, right? And then gathering these along, a photo of me with my friends or family, like, is that my identity? No, and you keep going. And so spiraling out eventually to kind of like leaving the course. And this whole idea here is, you know, weaving in the social justice standards of being, you know, okay with yourself, right? And really valuing yourself so that you can value others, and realizing that there are things about yourself that can be celebrated, and that doesn't diminish the talents of anyone else, and that you can look for the great in other people as well. So that's sort of where I went with it. A little corny, and I wouldn't get that explicit with high schoolers about it, but that's sort of the subtle underlying goal of that is, you know, in language classes, you know, students really have to put themselves out there. I mean, in any class, we are asking students to really participate, but there's really no language class without that participation, where students are talking and they're, you know, trying to gain like understanding and meaning of the language in real time, where they're practicing with you. And so you're asking a lot of them to be super vulnerable. And so celebrating them and letting them talk about themselves, I think is going to be a really good vehicle for them. And we're debuting it this year, so we'll find out.
That's right. And we want to get updates from you on how it's going in real time in a few minutes. But let's circle back now and talk about the construct of the curriculum storyboard. So when you were starting to draft one module at a time, what were some of the things that you paid explicit attention to?
Yeah, so definitely the guiding questions and the enduring understanding. So I wanted to, at the end, you know, what do I want the students to walk away with? What do I want them to feel or get out of this, even if they don't remember any of the, you know, vocabulary, right? Like I wanted them to get a feeling in a sense out of that. and then working backwards. What kinds of experiences are we going to have them go through so that they can actually get there and have that feeling? And one thing I built into each module is that they meet somebody. So at the beginning, they meet someone and you find out some information about this person. Now, the focus changes each module. So this person, you'll learn a little bit about their ID card, right? The next person, you would learn a little bit about their address, where they live. You might see like a shot of the street that they live on. And after that, a photo, all that. The icons are like in real life, these artifacts that they're going to see. And so that idea that they're meeting someone, you kind of dive into their world. And then at the end of the module, there's a page that's kind of like an adieu, like goodbye, au revoir, well, so long. And you kind of circle back and you look back at that person and you have this more vocabulary, more structure. You have more ways to talk about them. And then you can talk about yourself. And so that's sort of the goal there, where I wanted to make sure that I was anchoring each module before moving on and weaving it into the story.
So one of the things, Lauren, that I'm hearing you say, that you paid real attention to the notion of having some kind of artifact of what work symbolized the module experience. And potentially that artifact, that demonstration, actually was also, I think what I was hearing you say, represented by the iconography, meaning that you're really trying to create a window into the young students' world that you're working with. So Olivia, thank you, Olivia, for joining us. And she says that the icons are not arbitrary or just for show. And I think it's so incredibly important, Lauren, that when you started to think about the development of iconography, this is one of the questions that many folks have. How do you actually locate or potentially create icons that are really representative of the kind of narrative that you're trying to tell?
Yeah, that's actually the really fun part, I find. Because I love that idea of almost like it's like centers or passports. Like I feel like I like to do that a lot in my physical classroom, like almost like you're moving through and you're gaining these little, like a backpack with your little artifacts in it. I felt like that just came naturally to me, but I did, it is hard to kind of pare it down there. Like the preferences module, I really did spend a lot of time thinking about that. I wanted it to be very like now. I wanted it to be almost like if somebody could take a snapshot of all of your social media right now, like on your explore page, what's coming up for you on Instagram and why? Why are they targeting you? Is that your identity? Like, why are you getting all these cat videos, right? And so like, I wanted it to be really like current and now, and the trophy again, like something, and that's something I also bring up in this module too, is that like, even if you don't have like, you haven't found it yet, you will, and let's just like learn about what people are into and maybe you'll find the thing that's for you. So, I enjoyed that process. Canva is our friend. So I used Canva to find some of these images and just, I like the really simple, clean ones. For me, I just think it like allows me to really, it allows it to be a little bit more versatile.
Yeah. Well, and Pat's communicating right now. Good evening, Pat. Great to have you with us again. Just celebrating you, Lauren, about, again, using icons and pictures to tell a visual story before you start to tell the story. So even when you're looking at that open doorway, it actually is clarifying this kind of welcoming experience. So I think that is just going to be like such a rich and inviting roadmap to continue to give students and kiddos. So I want to talk a little bit about the text of the narrative that you wrote, again, on this like layout right here. One of the things that I notice immediately, if I'm, a reader of this map in your classroom, the title, which is welcome in light blue, is also sort of in big font in the narrative itself. So trying to really start to think about how do we start to cue the major thread, not just through the one module at a time, but the narrative thread of identities. So can you talk a little bit about the style of writing that you did in the narrative and any kind of sort of inspirations or challenges or hiccups that you found along the way?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I have to give another shout out to Olivia Grugan. Yeah, so this is something that she did on her survival Spanish narrative map. She had bolded these words, and I thought that's just so brilliant because it really forced me to distill down exactly what do I want this to be about. And you're writing all this before you're even doing any of that lesson planning or even thinking about like what will the daily delivery be of this content, right? So you're really honing in on, it's almost like you're doing a form of like poetry, or like you're really just zeroing in and saying, distilling this whole idea down to just a word. That was hard to do. And choosing the right word. I think that I really admired when Olivia did that, and so I just followed suit. And I think that I'm glad to hear you say that it's effective for you as well, reading it for the first time or just seeing it, especially for sharing with parents or students. They get a really quick sense, like at a glance, with the icons, with those bolded words, with the large font, what the course will be like very quickly. And I think that that's so refreshing because typically it's not that way. Usually when you start a class, you get like the first week of class, you're getting like a long syllabus and you got all the policies and procedures, so this feels really engaging for me, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and what I describe when it comes to a curriculum storyboard, it's a 10,000-foot view. Now, keep in mind, this is the entire French 1 course. So this is a year-long roadmap, and it's designed to actually create this kind of broad brushstroke so that students can actually visualize the journey or the experience that they're about to embark on. But what's so exciting about having you here, Lauren, is also starting to see that you are actively using this in real time. So how many weeks are you into your French 1 class so far?
So I'm not teaching French 1 right now, but we have our wonderful French team who is teaching it. And Jackie DiNardo, I want to give her a shout out because she has really dug into this, and she is the one who's actually fleshing out each individual assignment and page that the students are actually engaging with. So I did more of the outline of the course and the story, and she's actually doing the flesh on the bones. And that's like a huge lift, and she's done an amazing job. And we're working on that together. And she's teaching it right now, and I'm really excited to hear how it's going. We've only been in session for this is our third week we're going on, and so they're still in that initial welcome module. And so I'm excited to get more feedback, and maybe we can do another LinkedIn Live at the end of the year and see how the first French 1 went.
Well, and especially too, because at some point we would love to actually have some student voices in a LinkedIn Live conversation to see what kind of impact did it have on them, not just viewing it, but interacting with it. So I want to move to one of the next topics that we really got super excited and engaged with when I had a conversation with you about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and really starting to think about the idea of the challenge of teaching any language learning class at that level 1, because it is a massive heavy lift in terms of sort of foundational literacy, regardless of what language it is, and really starting to think hard about how do you start to begin to clarify and describe what's at the core of a level 1 language class from your perspective? And then we'll start moving into a conversation around cognitive load and building schema.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, the most important thing you can do level 1 is to have them enjoy being in that class with you, on the journey with you, to feel positive about it, have positive associations, and also language that they can use. How many, like in my life, times have I been where somebody's like, oh, you're a French teacher, I can say, j'aime le roast beef, right? Like they just have like one line from their French class. And they say, I took French for 4 years and I know how to say, I like roast beef, and it's so, there's so many, jokes about that like, I studied for this long and I memorized all this vocabulary and grammar, and what do I have to show for it at the end? So something about language teaching that I am really into right now is just giving students language, like functional language, where they can actually communicate. And so part of the build is using what language teachers refer to as like high frequency verbs and structures. And so the high frequency verbs being like, sometimes people call them the super 7. There's like 7 of the most frequently used verbs in the language, or the sweet 16 if you want to expand it even more. But giving them really like nimble phrases like there is, I don't, have, I do, and so that they can use in so many contexts, so that, you know, they can interchange it with any situation that they're confronted with, instead of a long list of vocabulary that's just really like isolated and not that useful. So we want to give them tools to be able to, you know, oh, I just need a noun to put into this phrase. I can say a variety of things. And so that's sort of our goal with the course too.
So when it comes to foundational literacy, I think you're also leaning into some of the territory of the attitudes, behaviors, dispositions that are also fundamental to grow. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? So what are the core sort of belief statements that you have to have when you're taking a language from scratch, basically?
Yeah, so you have to be a risk taker. You know, you have to be willing to take a risk. You have to take guesses. You have to use context clues. You have to be wrong and be okay with being wrong, and laugh at yourself a little bit too when you are wrong, you know, because in the language class, sometimes things sound funny and things sound, you know, and so you have to just keep going, you know, have some grit, perseverance, growth mindset. We go through all of that. We have an orientation that we've built that get students into the mindset to start classes with us, and that's something that's important to us.
Well, and again, I mean, if you start to look at the curriculum narrative, if you can pull that up again, and you look at module 1 specifically, growth mindset, for example, is right there. And so the opportunity to continue to create a culture, especially when we're welcoming in that first module, that the consistency of needing to grow the capacity of sort of not just a tolerance for making mistakes, but actually having a candid and a little bit playful, is what I heard you say too, Lauren. You have to find a little bit of humor in yourself so that you don't get so tight or rigid that you're become a little bit brittle, or you're a little bit leery of trying something unless you feel like you have it right.
That's right. And that's like, so, you know, so important to model day one and to celebrate at day one, and just cheering students on is so important, and giving them that confidence. Yeah, we try to keep it as light as we can, because we know we've all been there. And Pat did a great podcast last year with one of our Spanish teachers who's learning Korean, and how that has completely like given her a new perspective, because I don't really remember what it was like to learn French. I definitely don't remember what it was like to learn English, you know, my first language. And so it can be really valuable as a language teacher to put yourself back in the shoes of a year 1 language learner. I took a year of Russian in college, and that was like, that really helped me to be a little bit kinder to, you know, that first year language student who needs a lot of encouragement and a lot of reinforcement.
It's so fascinating too, because sometimes we get expert enough that we lose a little bit of the compassion or humility as to what does it feel like to be a novice language learner again. So I know that learning to speak Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic, especially in association with things like French, Spanish, German, Italian, where there's similar enough connections to English. I mean, it really does have that level of humility that actually makes it so that you can be a little more playful with yourself.
That's right. So that's the hope. Yeah.
And Pat actually just commented that we teach that learning is risk-taking, getting out of your comfort zone. And I think the interesting part of that, Pat, is I think that's what our curriculum journey has been, in terms of thinking about streamlining the curriculum and focusing on a curriculum narrative. That when we step back from cumbersome templates and lots of details, and start to ask the question that Lauren so beautifully clarified a few minutes ago, if I had to reduce it to a word or a phrase, what is at the core of what I want to really hone in and pay attention to? And how do I actually show the evolution of that over time, especially with the thematic idea of identities? So we're off to the races. And so now when we're starting to think about how do we begin to then lay out the detail orientation of the instructional planning? And so one of the interesting things, and something that Lauren, you and I got super engaged in a few weeks ago, is really thinking about the idea of cognitive load. So in case folks like just need a quick refresher on what cognitive load is, Lauren, you want to go after a definition?
Definitely. So cognitive load is the idea that you are trying to, as an instructor, as a teacher, to reduce extraneous cognitive load, because we all have a working memory that can only take in a certain amount of information at a time. And the goal is to get anything in your working memory to your long-term memory. And the way to do that is by mapping it to prior knowledge. And so, we all have sensory input. So even just looking at this curriculum map, we're seeing images, we're seeing bolded words. And these strategies are really friendly to the brain. The brain loves to have input that is sticky like that, like something to grab onto and things that jump out, because it knows what to categorize, right? It can say, okay, I can see what's important here. And it's relating to things that they know. So an image brings up so much for you. When you see an ID card, it's connecting to a schema of knowledge about what is an ID card, what goes on that normally, when do you carry it, why, does everyone get one, at what age, And so it's something that you're building on. And I think that storyboarding really lends itself well to, is friendly to, cognitive load, because it forces you to get rid of all that extra and focus on really being friendly to the working memory, so that students can build the schema that they need.
Yeah, I mean, as you started to describe that, Lauren, I think the notion that building schema potentially, perhaps, and again, please sort of engage with me on this, but what I was hearing you say, that building schema is actually sort of the front facing piece, so that you can actually start to think about, from a cognitive load point of view, what information, what foundation do they need, so that they can continue
Yeah.
to connect that directly to things that they already know based on those kinds of images and iconography. Did I get that right?
Yes, exactly. And you need to be right there with them too. I think it's something that, you need to have multiple touch points on something. And if a student has this piece of information that's kind of like bopping around in their brain that doesn't have a schema to live in yet, it can, that it has a choice of either you can create a new schema, which that takes some help, right? To say, okay, you've never seen this before. Let's start with the real basics about this concept or this idea. Or let's take and expand an existing schema, right? So that's really the difference. When you think about it, that's what's exciting to think about when we were just talking about a novice to an expert, right? That's like, we have these webs of knowledge when we have our content area that we are so strong in, that we teach in. And then you're going all the way back to the novice level. It's really hard as an expert to know where your webs are even, so you have to do a little bit of unpacking and a little bit of discovery about your own schema to say, like, what would I need to build this back up from the ground, and then try to do that for them.
And by the way, again, keep those insights, comments, questions coming. So like I said, we'll bring those up to continue to personalize the conversation that Lauren and I are having. I think one of the other interesting pieces for me, Lauren, is you sort of describe that beautifully in terms of thinking about the web of knowledge, and you're really building that with the student as a partner. How do you help them keep track of that? So I think it's one thing to design it like, overnight, like on your computer. It's another thing as you're starting to implement it and having them think about this from a not just a metacognitive point of view, but from a documentation point of view. So what's your general approach to doing that with your French 1 students?
So I feel, learning online, teaching online, I should say, is a gift in a lot of ways, because you do have this like saved space online where the students have all their work in there, right? So when they meet the different, people, the identities that they're meeting each module, their reflection, their initial meet, they write something about it, like, what did you think about, her ID card? What did you notice? What do you think this word means, right? So they're engaging with it. And then at the end, they also do another submission there. So it's a little bit like a journaling in a way, where they're doing a sort of engage and then a goodbye about that person that they're meeting. And we're also building on it each time. So the way we've structured all these meets is that each time we add a little phrase. So by the time they get to this last, person who they're meeting, it's actually a race car driver in Module 7. Very cool. We hope that some students will really like that. He lives in Monaco. And we can find out like his age, his address, what he likes, all these sentences now that they can understand and then actually tell about themselves. And then they can be the person who shares all this about themselves. And so, it's about bringing it back each time and building on it intentionally, really intentionally. And I think it's empowering for teachers too, to know that like you can make a difference in that. Like you can set up experiences for students that allow them to circle back to things and not lose the thread. And I think that's like part of the benefit of the storyboarding, is that it really helps you to like not lose your way and meander too much, because you're trying to really get down to the essentials. So you're saying, I'm going to get rid of anything that's extraneous to the, the task at hand, because there's intrinsic cognitive load too. Just like learning French is intrinsically difficult, right? You just have to learn a new language. And so you have that lift anyway. So let's get rid of the things that you don't need, that aren't going to serve the purpose of learning French.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too, Lauren, just try to figure out like how to keep students actually caring to actually look back on their journey along the way. Are there moments where you started to figure out, like, is there like a way of engaging them in some kind of record keeping? Do you typically do conferences, reflection prompts about growth over time? What are some of your strategies that you use to actually make that visible to them, not just visible to you to compliment them?
Yes, I mean, there is a really great tool for that for language teachers, and it's called an integrated performance assessment. So it's called an IPA. And so the students are actually submitting these all throughout the course. So they're using the 3 different modes of communication, which are interpretive. So they're getting, they're either listening to something or reading something and just trying to get the basics out of that, right? So they're just even answering in English at first, like, this is what I understood. These are these key phrases. I think this might mean this in French based on the context and everything else. And then the next is and they're meant to be, together. So what you've learned from the interpretive, then you can apply to an interpersonal task where you're actually deciphering meaning and discussing with a partner. And it's meant to be not rehearsed, just boom, let's go, let's chat about this. And then using what you've learned in the interpretive task and the interpersonal, you can do something presentational. So you're going to either write or speak about what you've just gone through. And so we've woven those through. Jackie has done an amazing job of introducing students to the different types of communication early on in the course. And so they're practicing that. And then at the end of each module, they are doing an IPA using all of the different things that they've learned that module. So it's a really great tool. And we just started last year with our final assessments in all of our courses, having IPAs, and it's really great. And students can actually, as they move up the proficiency levels, they can track themselves. So they might have at the beginning of the year been like a novice, and then at the end of the year, they can be a novice mid or even a novice high. And based on their can-do statements, how they match up, they can see that progression.
Yeah, and Lauren's talking about the ACTFL standards, which have competency-based learning targets that are organized around things like novice low, novice mid, novice high, intermediate low. You get the idea. So the notion is that students can actually track their growth over time, which is super cool. But you're also starting to see that I can actually grow significantly in interpersonal, but I still may be a little bit lagging in my opportunity to read or listen. And so the notion that a level 1 actually is sort of usually a hybrid mix of areas of real strengths and talents and areas that they need to have a controlling focus on. So
Exactly.
how do you get them to lean in and take responsible risks in the territory of your curriculum storyboard? How have you started to think about personalizing that for students by the instructional design?
Yeah, so we start off small with like, I think that the interpretive tasks we always say, in the language world, everybody always says adapt the task, not the text. So we start with authentic texts from the beginning,
Mhm.
not always teacher created text because that's not authentic. So you're looking for these authentic materials where they might come across it if they're in a French speaking country. And that's the idea too, is like building confidence and letting them know like, this is a real ad and you're figuring it out. Isn't that so cool, right? And so using authentic materials, I think, is a really important way for students in that interpretive mode to really feel like I'm doing this. I just watched a commercial. It didn't matter that I didn't understand every word. That's not really about what learning a language is all about. It's about communication, right? What did I get out of that message? And
Yeah.
then can I like share a message with someone else? Can I receive their message? So starting off really small and being as authentic as possible, I think goes a really long way for them building their confidence.
Yeah, and Pat just made a comment around that kids will love the racing and the idea that they have a connection to a race car driver in monocle. That is
Yeah.
so super cool, and so the
Yeah.
opportunity to continue to get them to see that they are engaged with the world as opposed
Yes.
to learning French so that one day they can interact with the world. I think that is
Yeah.
super cool. So what's
Yeah.
next, Lauren? What are you doing for French too? What's the
Oh
dream?
man, we're cooking up. Yep. Diversity. Yes. So it's not set in stone yet, but I've been really inspired. There's an author, she's American, but she's been living in France for a long time. Her name is Lindsay Tremuda, and she wrote a book called The New Parisienne. And
Mm,
it's all about how, the stereotype that people have about a Parisian woman, she's a certain way, based on years of like just cultural references. And she interviews a variety of like Parisian women and realizing that it's like so many different women make up a Parisienne. And so I was thinking for diversity at first, I thought, okay, they're going to just travel. They're going to be globetrotters. That's where I'm going. And then actually at the workshop in Altoona this summer, I like really slowed down. I talked to a colleague, Melissa, who's another French teacher,
mhm.
and I was like, what if they just never left Paris? Like, what if the diversity is just within one place? Like, it contains multitudes, right?
Yeah,
The new Paris, the new Parisienne. And so I thought, yeah, like people, they come to Paris for a certain experience, but there's so much more than that. And it's just such a melting pot. And there's so many interesting parts of Paris to discover. And so I think it's going to be somebody who comes to Paris, they're going to travel to Paris, the learner will, and they're going to experience the diversity of the French speaking world in the capital of France.
yeah. I mean, because I visited Paris for the first time this past January, and like the neighborhood that you're associated with or that you're staying in has
Yes.
just such a very different personality. Or just
Mm-hmm.
learning about Paris as like designed as a snail shell. Am I saying it right? So
Yes.
the
Yep.
idea is like it's not like zones like this. Like it's
Right.
just
That's
much more
right.
complicated than that.
Yes, it is so much more complicated. Yeah, the arrondissement. So yeah, they
Right,
spiral out, and then the
right,
certain arrondissement that you live in tells you, oh, you're from this one. Okay,
right.
so you are, so oh, all the colleges are in this one, and the universities are in this sixth arrondissement. So it's definitely each one has their own flavor,
Yeah,
and so yeah, I'm excited to dive into that because I think they're going to in that course they're going to like really learn how to survive a little bit too
yeah.
because they have to get through different experiences in the city and also they'll make a friend, which I think that's something that we brought up, Melissa and I. We thought, let's have them make a friend, let's have them dive into like a family a little bit and to get that real experience of people who are really living there, not just the tourist experience but a little bit more of like a homestay. I make a real friend, I get through challenges. We're kind of modeling it after that famous home like the study abroad. Have you ever seen
Mm.
that little, like,
Yeah.
you start off, there's a honeymoon period, you're like,
Yep.
I love Paris, this is awesome. And then like the streets are dirty and you're like, oh no, I miss my old home and food. And then you start to climb your way back out, and then you leave high, higher than ever. So, that's sort of where they're going to follow that sort of, that's kind of the narrative, is that like they start off really strong, the things are going to happen, and then they're going to assimilate and do really well by the end.
And Pat just made a comment about food, the importance of food, which is
Yes.
always powerful. And I
Yeah.
think the idea too is that there's just such a lovely bridge from this French one where you're starting to ground them in identity. Who am I? How am I seeing the
Yeah.
world? What are my talents, strengths, aspirations?
Mm-hmm.
Into
Mm-hmm.
this Parisian adventure where
Yeah.
their identity travels with them, but the opportunity to
Yeah.
see, based on that experience that I'm having, how can I continue to expand like my beliefs, my attitudes, but also my food
Mm-hmm.
preferences. So Pat.
That's right. Yes, yes, diversity through food. I love that too. That's the thing about stories, is that you can just start to really gather them and just really,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and Chrissy, can you put up the second page where all the modules are one more time? Beautiful. So this is the last round. If people want to take a look at the map in front of them, the curriculum storyboard, and take a look and say, what's one thing that actually grabs your attention? What's one thing that, if you're looking at this, whether you're looking at it as a parent, an educator, if you're channeling your inner ninth grader, really starting to see what actually is intriguing, what actually catches your eye. So again, it would be helpful because especially this is something that Lauren created with her French colleagues. Her students are actively working on this right now. So this also is a prototyped experience. So it's the story
Mm-hmm.
so far. So as you're starting to see this, Lauren, and you're in your mind, what's one thing that you're looking at that you really feel like it's a strong illustration, something that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I love the open door. I just think that's what I really want language learning to be. Maybe a little cliche, but it really does open doors for you. Speaking another language, being able to travel and really engage with people. I think that's an open door.
Yeah. One of the things that I so much appreciate about this particular example is the friendliness of the language, that in the narrative text itself, it's not easy to write this. I don't know. I mean, Lauren, you might make it look easy, but oftentimes we start writing in a very like formal, structured way where we start saying, next, the students will be able to, and then you start this list. So stepping back and really starting to think about what's the opening sentence? How can we continue to hook and hold the reader's attention? And that reader is somebody that may be a reluctant French student, or it may
Yeah.
be a parent of a reluctant French student, or perhaps it's somebody that really wants to get a sense of what kind of exciting opportunities that I can actually invest in throughout this course experience. Pat
Yeah.
actually made a comment that she's drawn to the icons and bolded words and how they match the titles. Yeah. So that was something, Pat, I'm totally down with that too. And again, I know it was something that Olivia actually sparked in her Spanish curriculum narrative and journey. And if you want to see that example, in addition to the French one, that's in the Streamlining the Curriculum book. So Olivia has a special space where she actually shows not just the Spanish 1 curriculum, but also the 4-year curriculum. So I think in terms of last words, anything, Lauren, I'm going to make it so that you have an opportunity to say what's something that you want to call people's attention to as they're beginning this journey of developing their own curriculum storyboard. Any advice that you would give?
Yeah, I think it's okay. It's really like writing, I think. A story, to me at least, it was, I started, I have fits, and I start and then I stop. I start and then I stop. I get an idea And then I think, oh, I don't want to do that. And then it's a journey, right? You get to your story eventually. It didn't just fall out of the sky one day. And from what I understand about writing, it's like that for people. You have to just sit down and just keep trying and, conference with people. I mean, I pulled in many people for this project, and, sharing your examples is really valuable, because without Olivia's examples, I wouldn't have been able to, craft it in this way. And so I'm grateful for all the influences I had, all the support. And yeah, I think it's just important to, have the same grit that a first-year language student does, right? Feel like you can toss out the bad ideas, stick with the good, and hopefully you'll start to see it come together.
Well, I think we're back now. Yeah. So I know we were having like 1 or 2 glitches with the Wi-Fi, but Lauren, it's just been such a joy. And again, the message that you said in terms of advice is that persist. It's not necessarily just because it looks so lovely and pretty as a one-pager doesn't mean that it started that way.
That's absolutely true.
The second thing is, get a good example to study and to look at. And so again, this French 1 example can be that for you. There are so many other examples in the Streamlining the Curriculum book, also on our website, curriculumstoryboards.com. But I think at the same time is just be playful with stories. I remember Olivia said something early on in the conversation in LinkedIn Live that being influenced by a children's book is not is not something that people take lightly. It's something that you continue to draw from. So children's books is something that's a common thread here, like the little engine that could, as well as Are You My Mother? But I also started to think about Eloise and the team that we had in our last month LinkedIn Live call, where they were so inspired by music. So when I was reading the module 2, Lauren, I was thinking about when it was Hello, It's Me. I started thinking
hello.
About me. Hi.
Yes. Oh yes, I'm the problem. Then I should grab that Taylor
of that other district's work. So,
yep, the Taylor reference. Should have got it. Yeah.
But like I said, it's just been such a joy to spend time with you, and hopefully people continue to benefit from the good work that you're pioneering in doing this. So next time we'll see how it's going.
That'd be great. Thanks so much for this opportunity to share.
Thank you. Take care, Lauren.
You too. Bye-bye.